Cans it up, the Penguins were changing. They're able to come out relatively easy. Here's Keith Primo with the first. Primo cuts the inside, scores! There it is! Keith Primo! The much maligned center of the Philadelphia Flyers wins this game in the fifth overtime.
TheFourthPeriod.com presents the O&B Puckcast, episode number 68. The trade deadline has passed. The Flyers have survived. They've made a couple moves. We're going to talk about it. I'm your host, Isaiah.
I'm Dan the Flyer fan.
I'm Chef B.
Yes, sir. Just a quick announcement. Anthony DeMarco, he's going to be more of a part-time contributor from here on out. You'll be hearing from him, and of course you can check out his work at TheFourthPeriod.com. And with that, gents, well, the trade deadline has ended. The Flyers have made a couple of moves. We're going to talk later with our special guest, the Courier-Post of South Jersey Flyers beat writer, Dave Isaac, returning to the show to wrap it all up with us. Gents, some initial impressions about just the Flyers' moves in general with Nate Thompson and Derek Grant coming in separate deals. Dan, let me start with you.
Well, it certainly wasn't the flashiest, but at the end of the day, it's about all that they could have done without making any, blockbuster deals elsewhere in the lineup to clear the cap. And, Derek Grant, Nate Thompson, to be quite honest, I had to look up what team Nate Thompson was a part of at the moment because I did not know he was in Montreal. Last I heard he was in Anaheim, so I don't know how long he's been up there. But, yeah, Derek Grant seems to be well-liked amongst Twitter. It seemed to be a relatively decent ad, so it's a good move, given the circumstances. I mean, at the end of the day, they could have gone, Tyler Ennis and Barclay Goodrow or, some other combination of depth guys. But it is what it is. I think it's a good move. It fits with the lineup well. They didn't want to disrupt anything in the top six that's been very strong lately. The bottom six players have been very strong as well. So adding a couple pieces here and there that can fit as their 12th, 13th forward for a playoff run that both have NHL experience and a bit of playoff experience is a great move.
Yeah, I think the Flyers really like the team that they have right now, and they wanted to supplement the team that they have with some experience, some flexibility, versatility, and a little more grit. Both Nate Thompson and Derek Grant will provide that. Now, Nate Thompson was acquired from Montreal. I spoke with Anthony earlier about him because he's obviously up there, and he really likes the player for the role that he'll be in as a fourth-line center. And it cost the Flyers a 2021 fifth-round pick. Now, Derek Grant was acquired from the Anaheim Ducks for Kyle Criscuolo, who was a Phantoms player, and a 2020 fourth-round pick. And the cap hit for both combined, and Dan, this gets back to what you were saying, is $1.7 million. Chef, let me get your impressions.
See, I mean, maybe it's me. I knew it wasn't going to be a big splash, like Dan said, because of what was available, and we kind of all in agreement that, like, in order to move something of consequence to happen, it would most likely be like a player like Ghost or something. But we all agree that that's not going to go until probably the summertime free agency draft, whatever. But so I was happy. I mean, I looked them both up. I didn't know Nate, but only reason I even knew Grant is because I was looking up Kase's brother a couple of times in the past, and I happened to see the stats on him. I'm like, that's not bad. He had 14 goals, 6 assists, 20 points. I'll take it. I did not expect them to get him 2 days later. It was just funny. So, but yeah, I mean, they're both they both kind of fit the Flyers mold of this season, maybe. I mean, and then the team. I mean, apparently they're both pretty good face-off guys, and that'll help down the road in case somebody gets chucked out in a defensive situation. So, and a couple good, fairly decent two-way players. So I can't complain about it. I like the move. I knew it wasn't going to be big. So,
yeah, and one of the things you get with Nate Thompson, he's one of the better. And I have to give a hat tip to Anthony Sanfilippo on this. He's one of the better right side face-off guys for a left-handed shot. And it's something Chuck Fletcher talked about today, where they want to reduce the wear and tear on Claude Giroux. And one of the ways you can do that is not send him out there or feel like you have to send him out there for these defensive zone draws, where Nate Thompson can take that draw. And if you want to reduce the amount of time that G gets on the penalty kill or eliminate him from the penalty kill, unless, you have situations where maybe they're behind or what have you, again, you have two guys that can play the PK, and that's definitely a benefit right there. In 49 games this year, Derek Grant has 14 goals, 20 points. He's a -1 on a lousy team. If you take a deeper dive, his shots for and against is not that impressive, but 70% of the time he starts in the defensive zone. And
worth noting that 14 goals is 6th on the Flyers in scoring right now.
Yeah. The Flyers are definitely doing this by committee. There's no question. And we'll take it. It's possible. But Derek Grant, he's a big guy, 6'3", 215. He has good hands around the net. He might get on the second power play for all we know. And we'll see how it works out, especially considering the corresponding moves to make room for these two players. Connor Bunnaman and Joel Farabee are demoted. And we were talking about before the show. The Farabee demotion is one that Chuck Fletcher personally sounded like he was involved with and made a decision about him and trying to get Joel Farabee in a situation, Dan, where he's getting regular minutes, kind of things we talked about in the past with him and Morgan Frost. Regular minutes, top line, power play, getting some confidence, because even though he gets 2 assists in the road game that we'll talk about later against Columbus that the Flyers won, his play's really been up and down. And in the last game that the Flyers won, and they had a really nice game against Winnipeg, Joel Farabee got sat a little bit. And I think this is a move that is an eye toward the future now that the Flyers have the luxury of a couple veterans in tow.
Yeah, I'm not overly surprised by it. The Flyers are going to play with their new toys, right? You're going to see what Grant and Thompson bring to the lineup. And in order to do that, somebody's going to have to sit. And given the current success of Lawton, Raffle, Aube-Kubel, Pitlick, those 4 aren't going anywhere. So the odd man out is Joel Farabee. So, you can sit him in the press box for, 2 weeks till they assess what they have here in Grant and Thompson, or you send him down to Lehigh where he can get some games in. Last time he was down there at the beginning of the season, he tore it up for the couple weeks that he was there. So, it's just better sending him down, go down, score a whole bunch of goals, reunite with Morgan Frost, put up some, get the kid some confidence before he comes back up, rather than sitting him in the press box for a couple weeks.
Yeah, the hockey's a game of confidence. Because I see so many on Twitter now, and this is, I don't know, Dan, if you saw I'm going to give his initials, MBM, with the emphasis on the BM part, maybe perhaps, where someone who is very analytically inclined, sounds like he doesn't watch a ton of hockey, but came to the conclusion that Nichushkin, who was with Dallas and now with Colorado, was actually having a better year than Leon Draisaitl. And that really kind of went a little viral in hockey Twitter. And I think when you come out with a statement that Morgan Frost and Joel Farabee are NHL quality players, yeah, that's their ceiling. And they could play up to that a game here or there. But you want a consistent effort, and they're just either not there mentally or physically. They're not developed enough. I just don't get why why people look at the game that way and take out the human aspect of it.
And I think that's the most important part, like especially with Farabee and Frost. Like these are two kids that are just developing. You know, this is not NHL 20. You know, you don't just throw them in the lineup and then they get, you know, more. Their overall gets better over time just because you play in some games. You know, Farabee's just been all over the lineup here. I mean, there was this stretch in January where he was playing, you know, 9-10 minutes a night. You know, now you're seeing back in the 15, 16, 17 minute, and it's fine. And he's playing well and he can hang in the NHL, but he's not blowing the doors off. You know, he's not a can't miss kid right now. He's 19, for Christ's sake.
Yeah.
You know, like just give the kid some time to develop and slow down and take a breath. And I'm sure at this time of year, I mean, he's been in the lineup, you know, most of the season. I'm sure he's probably missed a game here or there, but overall, you know, it's probably taxing on him at this point. He just got over the bout with the flu. He said he lost 10 pounds during that. And, you know, if he didn't gain it all back, he's probably 150 pounds if you're lucky. You know, it's a lot of work for a kid at his age to be there. And again, I think the human element when assessing these players is what is missing for most of these people. And it's going to take time. You know, I'm sure in time, 5-6 years from now, we won't even remember, you know, this stint with the Phantoms. He'll be up and he'll be kicking ass and taking names. But for the time being, it's certainly the right move, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm going to jump in there, too, real fast. Yeah. I'm going to piggyback what Dan said. He's hanging in there, but you just don't want him to hang in there and be like the other guy on that line, considering what you invested in him and what you think he has potential to be. And then I'm going to segue to something that Isaiah said, too, because when these kids come up, we have this whole notion that they're going to be somebody, something, someday. But the whole thing is AHL is a development league. And I don't know how many times you have said it in the last 2 months, Isaiah, but you can't say it enough, is let him go down there. Let him get his confidence. Let him develop a little bit more. There are certain things he can get better at, and playing all first-line minutes, you're going to see that a lot better than you would be on third. He got pushed down to the fourth line, too, remember. So he was getting even a little bit less time. So I think it was a smart move.
Yep, I agree. We'll see how it turns out. For now, that Thompson and Grant are here. Bunneman and Farabee are in Lehigh Valley. And just real fast, Nate Thompson is 6'1", 207 pounds. And he played 63 games this year for Montreal, 4 goals, 10 assists, 14 points. And again, he's not great with the shots, but he starts most. He's 55% on faceoffs, which is just tremendous. And the Flyers should be. I think the Flyers are already the best faceoff team in the league as it is, and he's getting 61% of his zone starts are in the defensive zone. So that is going to skew what his shots for and against are. I think the Flyers, like you guys are saying, are going to want to take a look at how these guys fit in the lineup. They didn't want to rock the boat in the top 6. It sounds like we'll ask Dave about it. We didn't hear too much about Shane Gostisbehere. He's healthy. We saw some guys that can't even play right now get traded, like Andre Kasha and Sammy Votny got a first-round pick from Cal. We're going to talk about Dave. I don't know what the heck Carolina was doing. Everybody's praising him. They got Trocheck, and we'll talk about that. But I mean, Robin Leonard gets sent to Vegas in a great move for the Golden Knights because they've worn out Marc-Andre Fleury.
Fire Bowman is trending right now, in case you're wondering on Twitter. Fire Bowman is trending.
Oh, yeah.
They are melting down after that one. So
I mean, if Barclay Goodrow can get a first pick plus, I said, in what universe is Barclay Goodrow worth more than Robin Lehner? With you got 3 teams out that outstandingly needed goaltending. I thought Vegas was like the third team on that list. Then you got Carolina and you have Colorado,
Avalanche.
Yeah.
I joked around with you. I was thinking that if it wasn't maybe for that, like you had said it earlier, if it wasn't maybe for that car accident in New York, that Lundqvist would have went somewhere. I was waiting for that. I thought that was going to be the big trade of the day today, but because of that, they had to hang on to him, I guess.
But King Henrik Lundqvist gave a very interesting quote about his standing with the team. It makes it seem to me, on the heels of them signing Kreider, I mean, just a little background. The Flyers earned the trust of the management and from the coaches backing them, supporting them to go out and augment this team. So did the Rangers. And I just got to love, I said that the Rangers were going to be a playoff contender this year. They weren't quite as good as the Flyers, but look out in a couple years. I talked about Shesterkin. I liked the moves they made. I thought Kakko would give him a little bit more than he did, but still, Adam Fox was a find. It's an exciting young team, and you have Zibanejad. It's definitely established himself as a first-line center. So they keep Chris Kreider. But at the same time, Buchnevich and Shesterkin, Igor Shesterkin is the new phenom goaltender who's going to go in and replace Henrik Lundqvist. Whoever thought that was possible? He's rocking what? Dan, what's he like, a 940 save percentage or something crazy?
Last time I checked, it was 940. Yeah.
Yeah. You know what? Now's a good time to, before Dave gets on with us. The Flyers are 13-5-1 since January the 8th. 7-3 in their last 10. 3-0 since our last show. And Dan, why don't you give a breakdown on some of the Flyers' competitors and some of the challenges that the Flyers have ahead?
Well, the Metro is pretty interesting right now. Capitals and Pittsburgh are really battling out for the top spot at the moment. Capitals have played one more game, which was a win. They have 82 points. Pittsburgh, game behind them, 80 points. But they've lost 3 in a row, have the Penguins, which is pretty interesting. Flyers won 3 in a row, sitting in the third place in the Metro, 35-20-7 for 77 points. Islanders and Carolina hanging out behind them. Islanders 35-20-6 for 76 points. They're on a 2-game win streak, and the Hurricanes 35-22-4 for 74 points with 1. Columbus on the outside looking in, 30-19-14 for 74 points. Biggest thing there, 8 losses in a row for them. So they are kind of free-falling through the standings here. Obviously, they've been just marred by injuries lately, which has been their biggest contributor for falling out. But, it's not out of the question the Flyers can move up here. They got Islanders and Carolina chomping at their heels. But, they are hot on the trail of Pittsburgh and Capitals at the exact same time, and that's interesting. You brought up the Rangers. They're not even that far out. 33-24-4 for 70 points, which is only 4 points behind a wild card spot. So, I don't know if they're going to make a comeback or not, but even they're not out of striking distance yet. The Panthers would be the only other team there that is really within striking distance, 32-24-6 for 70 points as well. But again, they traded Trocheck to the Hurricanes, so not entirely sure what they were thinking there, but, it'll be a very tight race, especially in the Metro here. The Atlantic is a little further apart. Bruins 90 points. Tampa Bay 85 and the Maple Leafs 72. So it'll be an interesting one. Flyers obviously have to keep winning. The Blue Jackets in a tailspin now is helping out tremendously. The Islanders brought in J.G. Pajot. How much impact is that going to make on them going forward? Who knows? And the Hurricanes had their pick of Brady Shea, Sammy Vatanen, and Vincent Trocheck were the big 3 that they added. So they are obviously gearing up for a playoff hunt as well. So be interesting to see here. Obviously, the Flyers didn't make any big additions. The Penguins brought in Jason Zucker a few weeks back. The Capitals added Brendan Dillon and Ilya Kovalchuk as well. So the Metro Division did a whole lot of additions here at the deadline, and all the teams are fighting, and all the teams are pretty much within close proximity to each other. Even first place in the second wildcard spot's only 8 points away. So very tight division. All the teams making moves to keep fighting here, and the Flyers, keeping pace with 3 wins, which is the best streak in the Metro right now.
Yeah. Just a couple things that I thought would be interesting to note. You talked about how poorly Columbus has been playing. The wheels have fallen off, right? And, of course, they made the big deadline acquisition of Devin Shore. Who? No, they did. They got Devin Shore. Okay, so moving along. They've got points out of their last 12 games. I think they've lost 9, but they have like 6 points or something like that. Like they have 6 overtime losses or something like that.
Yeah.
And that's why they're still in range. Because if you look at their overall record, if you just add in all the losses, they have 14 overtime losses. They're actually 30-33, their real record, if you add in the losses that are in overtime. And they have 74 points. The Flyers have 77 points. Well, the Flyers' actual overall record, counting the overtime losses, is 35-27. And yet, with the screwy system that the NHL has, they're only 3 points behind the Flyers. So, just interesting. Now, the Flyers have 20 games left, 11 at home, 9 on the road, and that will play out over 42 days. They have 13 versus the Eastern Conference, 8 in the Metro, and they only leave the Eastern time zone once. And they have 5 sets of back-to-backs. And in my humble opinion, gents, before Dave joins us here, I think Brian Elliott, and Shep, you can chime in on this, Brian Elliott should only play the back-to-back.
Absolutely. There's no reason. I mean, we're going into the clinch here. You want to know if Carter Hart's the man we all think he is, then he's got to play the man games. So you give him the day off when it's a back-to-back, but he should be in like this week. There's plenty of time in between games. He should play all of them.
Yeah.
Hands down.
Yeah. And are we on with Courier Post beat writer Dave Isaac?
Yes, we are.
Fantastic, Dave. Thanks for joining us here. You're on with Dan and Chef on the O&B Puckcast. Quite a day, huh?
Yeah, it really was. The official numbers look like they're all from the NHL. 32 trades, 55 players, up a dozen trades from last year. So quite a bit of action in the Metropolitan.
Yeah, no question. It was definitely not a letdown. You know, we could keep you here all night, so we're just going to try and hit on a couple of highlights, and obviously it's going to be Flyer-centric. What are your impressions about the moves to acquire Nate Thompson and Derek Grant for the Philadelphia Flyers?
Well, I think that there wasn't a whole lot of money to work with for Chuck Fletcher, and the obvious need was at center. Both of those guys play center. It doesn't look like Grant is going to do that to start, at least. But I guess the question I just put out on Twitter was like, tell me the trade that was out there that the Flyers should have made, because the prices were just so high. Like, I know that Pajot was on their radar. That was one of their targets. But when the price included a first-round pick, that was just not something that would have been reasonable for Chuck Fletcher to do, especially as a rental. Now, the Islanders paid that price and then signed him to a long-term extension on top of that. So you at least understand a little bit of why that first-round pick was them. But I guess it was as good as Fletcher could have done with what was out there. And even he said today that this is probably the weakest he'd seen in quite some time, and he ends up with 2 centers out of the deal. So I guess that maybe isn't the best endorsement of his 2 newest players, but I think it fills a little bit of a need. Is it a vast improvement? No, but is it more reliable players? Perhaps. Connor Bunneman was fine. He did an okay job in that 4th-line center spot, but you kind of assume that with a younger guy, maybe there's going to be a little bit of a fall off there, being the deadline and not being able to make any moves after today at 3:00. Like, what happens if that is the case in the future and he falls off? Like, there's a lot of money put behind these 2 moves today, so I don't think it was a really big gamble. I think it was about what Chuck Fletcher could really afford to do.
Yeah, he took in about $1.7 million in salary. Dave, you know, the only move I thought maybe, and again, salary would have been a factor, I liked the move made by the Avalanche for Nemestikov for a 4th-round pick. I thought he was also a player that might fit the profile of someone they'd be looking for.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think he would have been a nice fit, but Colorado gave up, what, a fourth-round pick? It would have cost the Flyers that because they would have needed Ottawa to retain salary in that scenario. So, yeah, that's the only one that I see as possible, but they still would pay a little bit more. And even if they had paid, let's call it a second-round pick, and double essentially what Colorado gave up, that wouldn't have been a vast over. I think that would have been fine, for a guy like Nemesnikov. But, that's really the only one that I look at out there and say, yeah, the better there.
Yeah, definitely see that. Now, correspondingly, the Flyers demote the aforementioned Connor Bunnaman, and to the surprise of many, Joel Farabee. And Dave, Chuck went out of the way to say, "Hey, that was my decision." Tell us more about that. What you might read into that.
What I would read into is probably that Alain Vigneault would have preferred to keep him. Now, they could have kept him up in terms of the cap. They still have that money available, but for Chuck Fletcher to say that was my decision, I think that says that he's looking for a little bit of a boost for Joel Farabee. Like he did say he'll in the near future, were the exact words that he used. Let me find the quote here. He said, "He's played fine, and I have got no doubt he'll be part of our group in the near future. But for him to go down and get first-line minutes, first-line power play, and not always have to be the responsible guy on the line, to maybe be the guy to drive the play." That's probably the most telling part of that, where he was looking for Joel Farabee to get a few more puck touches, and maybe confidence was a real issue for Joel Farabee recently, but maybe get him a little bit more numbers, more feeling good about the offensive game there in the minors, and then maybe he hits like a little speed burst and comes up here and can maybe replicate that at the NHL level, which is a little harder to do, but it just kind of puts another tool in the pocket there, and says, as Fletcher said today, today's Monday. By Wednesday, this roster, because of injuries, and just look at the Columbus Blue Jackets, a team really ravaged by injuries. Now the Flyers have a little bit more depth to handle something like that, and Farabee amongst that group.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You think about those young players, and the hockey's only going to get tougher from here on out. It's going to get more physical. The referee's going to maybe swallow the whistle a little bit. And you get guys like Grant and Thompson, you add them, you could picture them really making a difference if the Flyers are going to make a run.
Yeah, I mean, you need those guys to be big in big moments down the stretch. Like I talked to Matt Niskanen the other day and kind of had him recount, now almost 2 years after the fact, that he won the Stanley Cup in Capitals, and said, what are kind of the boxes that need to be checked for a championship team? And one of the things that he said was kind of what you alluded to there. Once you get to the playoffs, you're going to need somebody to step up who hasn't quite stepped up yet. And that's a tall order. That's a tough ask for a Connor Bunnaman or a guy. And these are guys in Derek Grant and Nate Thompson who have been there before and might be able to handle that a little bit better. I think the experience factor definitely comes into play in these last 20 games of the regular season, where guys with playoff experience kind of know what's coming, and that can help in a situation like that.
Yeah. And also there's more arcane issues like face-offs in defensive zone, face-offs, or a penalty kill, maybe taking a little bit more load off of Claude Giroux, things like that. I think Fletcher alluded to.
Yeah, that was kind of interesting. That kind of showed the depth to which they did these guys, and said that Thompson was one of those guys that could really win faceoffs on his offside. So for them to put that homework into that raised an eyebrow for me a little bit. And so, but also, again, like we talked about, the market was so small for what they were looking at that they had time to go that deep into all of the guys that were kind of in their their little pool there of what they were able to select from. So I guess I shouldn't be that surprised. Know about, face-off numbers by zone and handedness and all that kind of stuff, and the fact that he was looking to take a little bit more off of Claude Giroux's plate is another way in which I think they're trying to, spread the responsibility a little bit and try and give opportunity for the guys like are supposed to be leading this team to go out and do the scoring and the big time stuff instead of the dirty little details like taking a fake and hopping him back off the ice because he won the draw.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there any truth to the scuttlebutt that the Flyers veterans actually went to Chuck Fletcher or Alain Vigneault, maybe both, and asked for help during this playoff drive?
Yeah, that was the second story that I read today, and that was kind of something that Alain Vigneault alluded to a little vaguely, and I figured to Chuck Fletcher with that, and I asked Fletcher that a little bit more specifically and said, did the whole leadership group or one member of it come to you and ask for this? And he said that it's a conversation that they would have had with Vigneault and not necessarily him. So for one, that tells me that there's probably a pretty good relationship between the coach and the players. A good thing, especially this time of year. For a team that's taking that next step, that's probably a positive thing. And that term that they were looking for a little bit of help here, and also for the kind of caveat, it's not like they submitted a written proposal or anything, but it sounds like they wanted to keep the group together and move forward too, which was an interesting little wrinkle to it. So Chuck Fletcher did make good on that, and here we are. We'll see what happens in the last 20 games here. Yeah,
absolutely. Any discussions about the goaltender split from here on out, and with the back-to-backs? We were talking earlier about they have 20 games including 5 back-to-backs, and we were thinking it would be great if Elliott was limited to those back-to-back situations, and let's get Carter Hart in a little bit of groove, both not only home but away as well.
Yeah, I don't know if you only give him one game of those 5 back-to-backs and say, okay, Elliott's only getting 5 for the rest of the season here on out. But I think you're in the season where you need to get Carter Hart the heavier load because the 2 goalie system works great in the regular season, not so much in the playoffs. When was the last time you saw that? I mean, I guess you could say that the Washington Capitals, kind of fell backwards into it when they ended up winning the Cup because Braden Holtby was not on starter. But that was more so because they didn't like what they were seeing in there and made a change. So I think that you really kind of need to have the number one, the confidence in the goaltender, the confidence in the team in front of him in that goaltender by the time you get to playoff time. And there's really no doubt it's going to be for the Philadelphia Flyers.
Right. The situations that come to mind are all of those type where the teams kind of fell backward. The starter had fallen out of favor, and then he reemerged like Holtby did a couple of years ago. But
right,
yeah. Why don't we just review briefly some of the Metro rivals, some of the acquisitions that they, that they were able to make, and starting with the Washington Capitals. Heading the division, they pick up Ilya Kovalchuk and Brendan Dillon, and I thought those were effective adds for where the Capitals are at right now.
Yeah, I mean, we'll happens there. They've always kind of been tinkering with the defense this time of year. Kovalchuk has the potential to be a nice add, but at the same time, he kind of got this little rejuvenation with the Montreal Canadiens, and he's not going to get that same role that he had with the Habs down in Washington. Right. I don't think you're going to see him in a top 6. You would expect for that production to drop off a little bit, but we'll see what happens. It has the potential to be a nice ad, and that's player made too. Apparently, where he could have chose Boston or Washington, and he wanted to go back and hang with his buddy Ovi, who he pictured with over Christmas or New Year's or something like that.
Right. So, we'll have to see how that goes. And then the Penguins, well, you got a riverboat gambler and Jim Rutherford. So he picks up Patrick Marleau. He'd already picked up Jason Zucker to kind of replace Gensel, who's going to probably be out for the year. And then he goes and gets Evan Rodriguez and Connor Sheary. And of course, he knows Connor Sheary from the Cup teams a couple of years ago. So the Penguins are trying to stretch this window as long as they can.
Yeah, and you know, when you have Sidney Crosby at 32, Kenny Malkin roughly the same age, you kind of understand what Jim Rutherford's going for there, where he says, I'm going to, pry this window open and try and hold it open for him. And his scouting director probably doesn't like it because he keeps parting with first-round picks or second-round picks or top prospects in order to do it, like they did getting Zucker. But you can't fault him for going for it, and we'll have to see how that works out too. Zucker's the big prize of the bunch, and that was a trade that didn't come today or even this week. So they took care of their big business a little earlier on. I guess I'd be curious to see what happens with Marlowe. Like Sheary, Brian actually made a mistake in my article earlier and had Brian Rust in there. To me, they're the same player. You can plug anybody on Sidney Crosby's wing. I mean, Jake Gensel, first time I saw was the outdoor game in Pittsburgh. It was like a behind-the-scenes thing, and they had cameras near him, and I was like, "What is this, like a community kid that they brought into, Crosby or something?" And he's just so small and scrawny, but they can put anybody next to Crosby, and they'll score 20, 25 a year. So to me, it's just another guy, a Sheary or a Rust kind of guy. But Marlowe obviously has a much deeper resume, and that's what I'm really curious to see how he fits into that group.
Yeah, it's pretty clear he wants to win a cup before he retires. I think Jumbo Joe, his ex-teammate, wasn't quite as enthusiastic about moving along.
Yeah.
So, taking a look at the Islanders, now they almost won the day with a massive trade that will probably have to be completed in the summer with Zach Parise and Andrew Ladd and a whole bunch of salary shifting. But they actually did acquire J.G. Pageau, and earlier they had acquired Andy Green from the Devils. How do you think they shape up going forward?
Yeah, they certainly needed. I think it was Pellick that went down there, so they certainly needed to fill that hole on the back end, and the trade was one made last week. We'll have to see how that works out for them. A guy who I never thought he was a huge piece on the Devils. I mean, certainly should prove he was the captain, but in terms of on the ice play, that didn't move the needle for me a whole lot. But Lou Lamoriello, having experience with the Devils, player that he knew quite well, so he felt comfortable going out and getting. Now, Pageau, that was one where that was, again, a big target for the Flyers, and the first scared them off because that wasn't an appropriate price for a rental, and Pageau ended up not being a rental for the Islanders. So that feels for them as well. I think they needed some scoring. Any Barry Trotz coach team is going to be really tightened up defensively, and you don't so much worry about that side of the game. But filling the net on the other side, you do, especially, ever since they lost John Tavares, quite frankly, and they made it work last year and were so improved before. But this year, you just go, who's going to score for them? Barzal can't do everything.
Yeah.
So I think that's a nice add for them. But, long-term deal for them now, and time will only tell how that one works out for them. But I like the potential of that. I like Pageau's game. I thought he would have fit here, and really fit in quite well with the Islanders.
Yeah. But I doubt, like you were saying, Pageau gets a first, a second, and the first can't be a top 3 pick. Otherwise, it gets deferred to 21. And the third is only, I think, if the Islanders win a cup. So it's
right.
Yeah, it's not that bad, but the busiest team in the Metro had to be the Carolina Hurricanes, who were traded for Vincent Trocheck from the Panthers in a strange deal where the Hurricanes send Lucas Walmark and Eric Holla, going back with a couple other prospects. The Canes also acquired Brady Shea from the Rangers for a first round. No, that wasn't a first. I think it was a second. But then they trade for Sammy Vatanen for a first round pick, and Vatanen can't even play.
No, that's backwards. So Vatanen got the second, and Brady Shea got the first rounder. But
okay.
They were very active today, and a team that just lost Brett Pesce and has been without Dougie Hamilton for a while now.
Right. Yeah.
That's certainly, two pretty big holes that they had to fill. And that was a common theme for teams on this day was filling holes for injuries. And the Flyers have been largely lucky. Obviously, Nolan Patrick hasn't played a game this year, and Oscar Lindblom hasn't played since December. Those are two top 9 forwards. Those are big, but Lindblom they've been without for a couple months now, and Patrick, he never started, so it's tough to say that they have a hole there because they kind of filled it before the season even began. So I think that those injuries and filling up those holes that was today. But while the Hurricanes were very active, to me, they made one trade too few. They just lost 2 goalies on Saturday night. They second league goalies on their roster right now, and they didn't do anything to improve the goaltending. That really surprised me. Now, we talked about the Rangers a little bit, and they end up Shesterkin due to a car accident, and
right.
that turns their 3-goal monster into a 2-goalie situation that's much more comfortable. But if that hadn't been the case, then I think that they would have been a good fit for Georgiev down there in Carolina. I think that would have been a possible landing place for him. But I'm just surprised that they didn't look elsewhere around the league for some help between the pipes. Yeah.
There's no question that Ranger car accident, and that was a crazy thing. On the same day they decided they're going to keep Chris Kreider, and the Rangers are coming on. They're only 4 points out of a playoff spot. And, of course, they traded Brady Shea, and thanks for correcting me on that compensation there. So you got to watch out, because if they do tie anybody, they have among the wild card contenders the most amount of regulation wins with 29. So you got to watch a lot of different balls in the air there,
Yeah, this is an incredibly tight race. I mean, Washington and Pittsburgh have come to earth a little bit, and even the Flyers. Well, it was great for them to climb up that ladder and get to third place. Before that game, whatever it was, Saturday or earlier within this past week, where it was Washington and Pittsburgh, and they were tied. It was a game to decide who gets into first place there. It was like if the Flyers win 2, they're in first place. They lose 2 straight, they're out of the playoff picture completely. It's an incredibly tight race. It could be the first time that a team in NHL history has ever gotten 100 and missed out in the playoffs. That's happened on 260 occasions, if I'm not mistaken, that a team has gotten 100 points to finish the season, and in all of them, a team has qualified for the playoffs. So it's going to be incredibly tight. And the Flyers are kind of used to playing like their hair's on fire, but it's interesting to talk to a guy who's not used to this at all. He's used to being in where the Capitals are right now, in that top spot, and kind of on cruise control. So maybe this is a good thing for kind of used to playing playoff hockey in January and February, even though they're in a much better place than they usually are this time of year.
Yeah, and they know it's not their fault. It's just a circumstance. It's not like the last couple of years that they put themselves in a hole or anything like
right.
that. They're actually getting better as a team and peaking at the right time. But one thing I did want to mention, you talked about the Canes. They had to be kicking themselves when they saw the compensation for Robin Lehner, who goes to the Vegas Golden Knights for a mid-level pick who was a 4th rounder in 2018, a 2nd rounder, and Malcolm Subban. And I think the Vegas Golden Knights also got some other bit of compensation along with Robin Lehner. And I'm thinking, why not the Canes? I mean, they really had a need, like you were saying.
Yep, I agree with you. That's one. I mean, Chicago had 2 goaltenders on contracts, and they end up moving one of them. It would have been tough for them to move both. But if you're Carolina, that's the first call you make of the day. You solidify your play in between the pipes, and they certainly made a splash elsewhere. But it doesn't matter if you can't get a save.
Well, there's always a 42-year-old Zamboni driver who had a kidney transplant who might be able to help you out.
Yeah, once he's done with the media tour, they might need to actually sign into a after all that.
God bless him, man. I used to sell in transplant market. I used to sell anti-rejection drugs. So I felt really good when I found out he had a kidney transplant. And it's like, wow. I mean, going from that point where you face dialysis 1 minute and the next minute it wasn't a minute, it was over a course of many years, I'm sure, where he's in an NHL game. Just a great story. But, just elsewhere in the conference, I thought the Maple Leafs actually did a pretty decent job getting Jack Campbell and Kyle Clifford and maybe even Dennis Malkin. But that situation on Saturday with the aforementioned Zamboni driver, who was a Toronto Marlies, part-time goaltender. I mean, it's almost like their season ended or something.
Yeah. I mean, it's always chaos in Toronto, right? Like I was listening to radio the other day, and Brian Burke, who's tremendous at in this analyst role, but he was saying, I remember when I was in hockey ops there, and there's this right next to Scotiabank, it's called now, the arena up there, and he said, if they win 3 in a row, the guy comes out there with a tape measure and the floats will fit for the parade underneath it. And then if they lose 3 in a row, they've got armed guards making sure nobody jumps. So, Brian Burke, that's part of his allure and his maybe going a little over the top with his storytelling, but he's not that over the top because it really is. Toronto thinks it's the center of the hockey universe. They live and die with every play. So, definitely a sense of, grim results after Saturday for the Toronto Maple Leafs, and they're part of this race too, because those wild cards are up for grabs, and they could easily slip out of that third place.
Yeah, I think that's the lowest total of all the teams that are currently in the playoffs. That's because of the NHL's quirky playoff system. They have 72 points. Teams with more but are outside that division are not, are excluded at this time. And that's because to maintain the divisional integrity, if you want to call it that integrity. I don't know. Yeah, so Dave, just a couple more from me. Looking at the Bruins did a nice job with Andre Kasha, which was, seemed to be a pretty good deal for a guy who gets hurt a lot. And today they swapped Danton Heinen for Nick Ritchie, who was a former first-round pick with the Anaheim Ducks.
Yeah, I think that's a team that, is kind of just in tinker mode and also maybe looking at cap stuff in the future. I think they're in a pretty good spot there where they're kind of, I don't want to say an autopilot, but they're in a very, very good spot. They still need to fend off Tampa Bay for first place to a certain extent. But I think the fact that they were able to get out from under the David Backes contract in that Andre Kasha deal was pretty big for them. And that money that they end up saving there, and they have nearly $6 million for the rest of this season, which obviously they won't use unless they have call-ups or something like that, is Krug, who's a pending unrestricted free agent. So I think that's probably their next task, and whether that happens sometime or happens over the summer, I don't know. But I think that was part of the directive there, was to open up some money for Krug.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And finally, looking at the Eastern Conference, the teams that are playoff worthy, the second place Lightning in the right behind the Bruins in the Atlantic. Now, they made a really nice deal for Blake Coleman from the Devils, and I didn't think they gave up a heck of a lot. But today they had made what many people thought was a head-scratcher, giving a first-round pick plus for Barclay Goodrow from the San Jose Sharks. He's kind of like a younger version of the players the Flyers got today. In fact, he was a guy I thought the Flyers might take a look at or run at. Frank Seravalli seems to think that, like you just referenced earlier with the Bruins, this is a look ahead with Coleman and Goodrow at them needing to have inexpensive players for next year as well.
Yeah, I get that, but when you look at that move in a vacuum, Barclay Goodrow for a first-round pick? You got to be kidding me. That's why I say I don't know what else. When prices are that high, what did you want Chuck Fletcher to do?
Right.
Cap room he had. That one I'm part of the head scratching crowd there. I don't get that. Nice player, but first-round pick. Jeez.
Yeah, I tweeted out, in what universe is Barclay Goodrow worth more than Robin Leonard? But,
right.
Yeah, it's crazy. So, the Flyers, this is who the Flyers are. What do you think about the team in general, how they've been playing, where they're headed, and what should fans expect going forward?
Yeah, I think, like you mentioned, they're kind of peaking at the right time here. They're certainly taking that next. This is a team where in seasons past, probably each of the last handful of years, they were a team trying to fit a square peg through a round hole, and now you have a team that's really slotted properly. And that was true even before these two trades. Now you look at them and you say, okay, maybe those two moves today, a slight bit of upgrade, but it's mostly about the depth. And if something happens down the road in these next 20 games or in the playoffs, they'll be well covered. Today didn't needle very far for me, but I do think that they're at least set up better. And being in the rental market as it was, Chuck Fletcher didn't box out Morgan Frost for next year. He didn't sign somebody with term and keep a player that has the potential to be NHL ready soon from actually getting there and being on the roster. So hard for me to be too critical. I would have liked, like I said, I think that would have been a little bit more of an impact. But when you see the prices, I think that was pretty much as good as Fletcher could have done.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you think, I know people, these stat guys come out with odds that the Flyers, I think the last time I looked, it was like 85% or something chance of being in the playoffs, depending on who you looked at. But you can never say a lead pipe cinch when things are this close and the nature of this game, injuries, what have you. But I think most fans think, hey, they're in the playoffs, but are they going to win a round? And does it really matter how they play, or is it more important that they just win a round and kind of create a new benchmark for themselves?
I think there's something to that, getting past the first round. I think even if they got into the playoffs and went out in short order, there would be a lot more eye rolling from a good portion of the fan base, frankly, even though they have clearly taken a step in the right direction and like I said, been a team that's slotted a lot better in years past, and there's more talent that's knocking on the doorsteps instead of being 2, 3, 4 years away. I think that is the benchmark. But you need to, there's so much time left and things are so tight that it's really difficult to predict who they would play in a first round matchup or even who they match up well against after all these teams have made moves today. You look at the remainder of their schedule. We've got San Jose tomorrow and then a home and home with the Rangers, Washington, Carolina, all division games. Buffalo now, trying to maybe make a run for it after getting Wayne Simmons and trying to capitalize on Toronto faltering and see if they can make a run. That won't be as easy of a game as it looked like maybe a month ago. Then Boston, Tampa Bay, two really big teams in the Atlantic, Minnesota, Edmonton, St. Louis, Dallas, all Western Conference teams that are in there or right around there.
Right.
It's going to be a tough go. There's really not a whole lot of games. The Flyers have a game in Detroit in late March. That's probably the closest you can get to a gimme. And then New Jersey 2 nights later. So outside of that, pretty much it. The rest of it's pretty tough. So it's going to be hard to predict. If they can create that new benchmark for themselves, but when you look at the process and you zoom out in terms of how they've built this team and slotted things for the next couple of years, it's hard not to like it.
Yeah, absolutely. Dave, I just got one more from Chef. Go ahead.
Considering all the fuss that's been made about a 3C and obviously them sending Farabee down, now we're getting to the point where, it's obvious that probably Patrick, even if he comes back, will not be up with this team. But being all the hoopla around a 3C and then hearing now that maybe Grant might not be might be on a wing. Is that
Right. I think that when Elaine Vigneault said that today, I think he probably needs to see the player. I think that in the long term, Scott Lawton would prefer to play wing, and the team thinks he's more effective at wing. But the way that things have gone recently, I think that keep rolling with Lawton in that spot for now. And there's the potential for Grant to slide in, and maybe they swap down the road. And Fletcher didn't completely close on Nolan Patrick coming back. In fact, I asked, if he comes back in the regular season, do you even have the room for him cap-wise? And they do. Everything's so tight right now, even with the cap, it would be a hard fit. But they still have a little bit of options there if Patrick's able to come back. If Frost, he's been on a pretty good run recently. If he continues that for another week or two, maybe he becomes an option there. They didn't shut the door on that one either. So I think they kind of need to see where Derek Grant fits in here, and he'll start out at the wing. But we'll see. That's still a question that needs answering in these last 20 games.
Yeah. Dave, you did remind me of the one last thing I did want to get to you. Then we have to talk about the Courier Post Online. Nolan Patrick, it would seem he would need at least a month to get ready, and he's only allowed to have a very limited assignment in Lehigh Valley because of the rules after the trade deadline, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, they won't be able to outright send him there. He wasn't on that roster like Farabee was and Bonneman was today. He would have needed to been there on clear day for them to outright send him there. So it would, at this point, he's limited to a conditioning stint down there, and that's why it can't be a month long.
Yeah, I just get the sense they're not planning on it. You just have to see how that works out. I just want to let the people know before you go, Dave, and I appreciate you so much for coming on to talk to us. If you go to, is it cpsj.com, Courier Post Online? Is that the shortcut?
Yep, yeah, that's the shortcut. Instead of typing out the whole thing, cpsj.com.
Yeah, right now to have a special. I subscribe to the Courier Post, and of course, Dave is the best Flyers beat writer out there. And right now, for 3 months, it's only 99 cents. That's a savings of 90%. CPSJ.com. Go to Courier Post, support your local papers, and get the best Flyers coverage you can find anywhere.
Thanks for the plug. Really appreciate that.
No problem. Dave, it's always a pleasure to have you on. Where can people find you on Twitter?
I'm on Twitter at Dave G. Isaac.
Terrific. Dave, thanks so much, and hope to talk to you very soon down the road.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
Take care. Wow, that was a good session. I just want to apologize. Some of the audio there was a little in and out, but it was in enough that we didn't want to go through a reconnection because that can be kind of iffy. Dan, what are your thoughts and some impressions that you got in the discussion we had with Dave?
Yeah, I think I think he was pretty much on the same wavelength we were as far as what we thought of the Flyers additions as well as the rest of the Metro. And the Flyers did what they could here, and it's going to be a very interesting push over the next 6-7 weeks left of the season. See where the pieces fall here. As teams like Carolina make bigger moves and big risky moves, where the Flyers made small safer moves. So it'll be interesting to see where the pieces fall come the playoffs.
Yeah, it's an underrated thing to try and integrate as many pieces as Carolina is going to have to do. Rod Brindamore's really got his work cut out for him. He's going to have to get guys to get in the right spots. And the way that Carolina plays, if you can't keep up with those guys, and if they misjudged some of the players that they acquired, it could be a problem, especially with that net minding. I don't know what the heck they were thinking. They were so busy chasing an already unhealthy Sammy Vatanen that they missed out on the possibility of getting a goaltender, which I thought they should have done. But, maybe after watching David Ayres, the Zamboni driver, on Saturday night, they figured, look, if we play lockdown defense, we could get an AHL goalie like Nedeljkovic. He's supposed to be the guy of the future anyway. But I just think if you're really all in, you're going to get Trocheck. And let me tell you about Chef, this guy, and Dan, you could chime in. This guy, Lucas Walmark, who they traded to get Trocheck. And I like Trocheck. He's been hurt. I think he got a broken leg or something like that. And Arikala, who also went with Walmark to Florida. But he also had an injury as well. So neither one of those guys has come back to form. But that Lucas Walmark is so noticeable when I played Carolina. I said, who the hell is this guy? He is so annoying. He's always around the puck, always around the net. Maybe that's an under-the-radar acquisition by the Panthers.
Yeah, I think Walmart is one of those guys, like you said, you don't really hear about him any other time, but once the Flyers play the Hurricanes, it's kind of like, this guy's all over the place. So it'll be, again, Florida's in a pretty good spot with who they have on their roster. They could spare Trocheck. It's still a bizarre move, but, getting 2 roster players and 2 semi-decent prospects is a pretty decent return. They're obviously not in full tank mode because they're still on the fringe, but, they've kind of been that fringe team for, 3-4 years now. So it's not surprising they were looking for some kind of shakeup. And Walmart may be an underrated addition down there in Florida.
Yeah, I heard Dale Talon say after the All-Star break, it's not like they were such great shakes before the All-Star break, but they just haven't been the same. They had to shake things up. And elsewhere around the league, they were saying Talon was given orders to try and reduce the payroll a little bit. So that might have been a factor as well. Chef?
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, let's face it, the scoring wasn't the problem for Florida. It was the D. I mean, they got all those guys that can score on a dime. So I don't know. The whole thing was weird to me. I'm with Dan on that one.
Yeah, well, they have a great power play. It's like 22%, one of the better power plays in the league. But they only have a +5 differential. It's a strange team, Bob. They signed Bob to all that money when they have Spencer Knight, who's one of the top 5 goaltending prospects, drafted, prospects in the entire NHL. And I think they wanted to really impress Q. They made a lot of promises. And now Q has had a chance to take the inventory of what this roster looks like, and they're probably going to start making changes. And Vinny Viola, the owner there, also is looking at the gate receipts and their chances of making the playoffs, and probably gave out the orders to listen. If you're not sure, we need to reduce payroll. So we'll see what happens with that. Any other thoughts about I guess the other big story was that Chris Kreider was the top name on the TSN trade bait board, and he gets signed by the Rangers. They decided to keep him. I mentioned that earlier. But if you look at that list, I think I'm looking at it right now, and if you they put a pop up in there, so then the screen moves for 6 inches. I hate that. I think the top guy that didn't move outside of Kreider was Bufflin. I never thought that was going to happen because his contract's under dispute. We're talking about $7.6 million. And then you can take a look at a guy like Jesper Fast or Thornton, I mentioned earlier, Joe Thornton, Mike Hoffman. Look, if they get rid of Trocheck, they're not going to get rid of Hoffman. Or maybe they just weren't happy with the offers. He is a UFA.
Well, didn't you last week, DB, when we had him on, said that he didn't think Thornton was going to go anywhere because it was way too comfortable. His lifestyle, he was in love with his lifestyle. He likes it out in San Jose. His family's there. So that one wasn't a surprise to me. I didn't think he wasn't going to go. I didn't even think about him all day.
Yeah.
And know what was weird, too? Did anybody notice I was watching NHL Network, and in the top right corner, they flash, Wayne Simmons, interest, people that are on the block or whatever. And Brian Elliott was up there.
Yeah, I noticed that.
In what world, I thought that was one of the weirdest things. In what world would the Flyers trade their backup guy who's been very, very above average, let's just say, for this team this year, and then have to rely on a line after we just got rid of Berube? So, I thought that was odd. That was just an odd one. I think they were reaching there.
Yeah, it was a reach. The only thing is, I was just thinking of a funny thing. It's what I'm about to say is just parody. But I was just thinking maybe Cam Talbot just regrets his decision to go to Calgary. He's having a much better year. And, this speaks well of Chuck Fletcher, Dan. He really wanted Talbot. That was his first choice. And Talbot's having a better year numbers-wise behind a team that's not as good defensively as the Flyers in Calgary. And I was thinking to myself when I saw the Elliott thing, I said, I wonder if Cam Talbot made that call and said, hey, let's switch. I screwed up.
I mean, it's possible. Maybe Fletcher, there was kind of a weird trade at the time, but maybe he knew what he was talking about with Talbot. And, as far as Elliott goes, he's fine. He's a perfectly acceptable backup goaltender.
Yeah.
But as far as free agency goes this year, there's going to be plenty of other options out there, and I don't think that Elliott is going to be here beyond this season.
No, nor do I. I'm not sure. Is he even 900 yet? No, he's still 899. Look, I'm not going to kill him. The only thing, he's good for a bad goal every other game. But one thing that's different, even with his 899 save percentage, he's making momentum saves. You got to give him credit for that. And the same thing with Carter Hart for the most part. Now, under the category of really bad starts, which I think is a save percentage of 850 or less, Carter Hart has 9 out of 34 starts. Elliott has 8 out of 26. So that's where, when they've been bad, they've been really bad. And I think that's what's been going on. They've really cratered. But, yeah, that was funny, Chef. I mean, that was really crazy. But,
I was looking at all these other teams that had all these people on the block, and I just started laughing. I was like, Elliott, that's the only – because realistically, I'm like, yeah, I guess that's kind of it. I mean, there's like nobody else really that there could be like even potential trade bait on the team right now. I mean, but I just thought it was just like a huge stretch. It made me giggle.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So looking ahead, let me just say one thing before I get to the schedule, and then we're going to close out. And I hope you've enjoyed this trade deadline wrap-up edition of the O&B Puckcast. I think the Flyers, now they were 3-0 since we last, had our podcast, and they beat Columbus. They beat them 5-1. Then they were down 3-1 in the other game in Columbus, and then they beat the Jets in a workmanlike game, and where they got 3 goals from Lawton, JVR, Hitlick line. You know what, Dan? I think when you take a look at the home and homes with Florida and Columbus, when we look back, that's when we knew that the Flyers were for real. Because they always struggled in Florida. They always struggled to beat the Blue Jackets, depleted as they might be. The Blue Jackets have a structure, and they're very strong mentally. And that's something Matt Niskanen was talking about, how they've improved in that category, the Flyers. And they pulled those home and homes off, and they swept it. And I think that's a big deal for their confidence going forward for the playoff drive.
A confidence as well as just their overall standings. If they went out there and went 0-4 against Florida and Columbus, this would be a whole different situation right now. And but they didn't. They went out there and they handled their business, which is great to see against 2 competitive teams in 2 places, again, in Florida and in Columbus, where they don't exactly have the most success over the years. So 4 very big games that obviously helped them get to where they are right now in the standings.
Oh, absolutely. We'd have a totally different show. This would have been a sell every UFA. This would have been like a total opposite. We'd have had Dave Isaac going, how come they didn't trade JVR or whatever, I mean, but yeah, that would have been a mess. So they have 77 points, and if they only got like about 3 out of that, out of the 8, man, they'd have 72 points. They'd be looking up at a whole bunch of teams. Chef, any final thoughts?
No, I think that, I think they got the big schedule coming up. I'm looking forward. Like Dave said, there isn't many gimme games on their schedule. Even the Sharks are going to be a little bit annoying coming up the other night, tomorrow night. So, yeah, they just got to keep winning the games they need to win. They got to play hard, and let's go Flyers. That's it, I guess.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so, yeah, I'm not sure if we're coming back the 2nd of March or the 9th. So let's just say they have San Jose tomorrow night. Then on a rare Friday night game in Philly, they host the Rangers. Then they go to Madison Square Garden Sunday in the afternoon. They're always fun, those games. Then they go to Washington. It's back-to-back. The next night they go to Carolina on the 5th. They host Buffalo on the 7th, have a couple days off, and by then we'll have had a show, and we'll get back to you as they face their the rest of their schedule. So with that, I can't think of any more we can cover without breaking down every single trade. I'd recommend that you go to TSN and check out their trade tracker, their trade list, and all that. And we have a lot of other pundits that helped our show come together tonight. So with that, want to give our contact info. Dan, why don't you start?
At Dan the Flyer Fan, at Brotherly Puck, at Brotherly_pod, and at Angry Negative.
Fantastic. Catch the shows. Go to Brotherly Puck. Make sure you catch all those fine podcasts. Chef?
Yeah, you can catch me at Steam Pub in Southampton, and you can find me at Chef de Lefby on Twitter.
Fantastic. I'm Isaiah, ISAIAH _520, Isaiah _520. You can yell at me. And, of course, the O&B Puckcast is at O&B Puck, at O&B Puck. If you could rate and subscribe on your favorite platform, or on Apple, SoundCloud, Spotify, iHeart, Stitcher, TuneIn. We have O&B Puckcast YouTube channel. But if you could subscribe on your favorite platform, it moves us up the charts, and people looking for Flyer podcasts can find us much easier. And it's always no charge. And with that, we close out. Until next time, everybody, take care.